about conscious laws of human nature. Now, it's an interesting book in terms of the way of thinking, you could argue, is borderline paranoid and suspicious, but it's still concise, right? Which is why it's quite an interesting read in itself. So we're going to go through some parts. In this abbreviated version, we've got the larger version and go through. Page 24, the group effect. This is the high-grade variety of the group bias. When you are in a group of a large enough size, we become different. Notice yourself and others at a sporting event, a concert, a religious or political gathering. It is impossible to not feel yourself caught up in the collective emotions, which we'll talk about in a second. There is an exhilarating positive aspect to the stimulation of group emotions. But if you notice the appeal is more diabolical emotions, such as hatred of the other, rabid patronism, aggression, or sweeping world views, you need to inoculate yourself and see through the powerful pull as it works on you. So, that in itself is what we're going to talk about, is the group effect of when we put humanoids together. Now, there's a lot of debate and there's a lot of argument for and against the fact that we are designed to be tribalistic creatures. Let's word it that way, okay? Because let's look at it, right? If we look for history and we look at the evolution of how it is we came about, it very much started off being a very tit-for-tat kind of game of who in the evolutionary proverbial context is going to conquer all within the landscape, right? And you could say, though I don't believe in evolution, you could say, well, okay, well, the monkeys, came about and monkeys learned to use tools and that built to the Homo sapiens and then that evolutionized into what we are today. And in a lot of ways, it was cognitive genius, collaborative effort, and experimentation with tools that really propelled us to the top, right? It wasn't necessarily the fact we were stronger or more predatorily designed. It was the fact we could use tools to overcome those challenges, okay, as we developed. So, bearing that in mind, you could argue that on an evolutionary basis, yes, we have very much been primordially programmed through our liking to be community-based, and with that comes community spirit and community collaboration. And on an energy perspective, obviously, we're going to be sharing those energies very much so because of that, right? You become your environment. Now, the other problem we have is when you put people in a group environment, it's the dominant energy or the dominant narrative rules the nest, okay? And where can we see this? Well, LGBTQ has this problem all over, doesn't it, right? He or she or they who shouts the loudest shall be the voice of reason and the sovereign of which else to follow, right? Because we live in a world where people want to belong in groups and communities more than ever rather than find and carve out their own identity, right? Because that in itself is to travel Mount Everest is what it feels like for a lot of people. So they'd much rather subscribe to an ideology or an idonism or a dogma that already pre-exists to validate an insecure feeling they're feeling by becoming part of a structure that believes what they believe in, even if it's wrong, okay? Even if it can't exist and it's wrong. And that is part of what brings out the worst in us. I mean, look at fascism, right? If we look at Nazi Germany, okay, this is the thing that people fail to realize about it. You had Germany, right? Germany was in a poor state as it was. It was in an economic crisis. They were in debt because of World War I. And then Mr. Hitler came about with his fantastic, stupid idea of genocide and all of his hedonistic pleasures going down the route of genocide and superiority. But the problem you had is you had a man with a loud enough voice and a strong enough will to gather normal German men. And these were your neighbors, your doctors, your lawyers, your bankers, your accountants. Even doctors who swore an oath to save people for a living. And he applied his seed of fascism and its regime in their head, which collectively brought out an energy of evil, right? And that is scarily how powerful together cognitive thought can be, okay? Which is why you got to be so careful of it, because it only takes one man to throw a big enough stone and do a big enough ripple to get everybody else to follow. And it's a double-edged sword, this, when we bring this to other communities, because this is part of my worry with the future of new generations when it comes to the internet. It's we had the Bible, right? We look at the Bible. Now, I don't care too much about where the Bible came from, but I care about the context, okay? And you have 10 commandments, which came from a divine source, I believe, that someone communicated with in some way. And it was a codex of ethical living. That's, to me, what the Bible was. It was a concise plan of stories and a concise narrative of ethical living. Because you had a society and a landscape of people that didn't know what to do. They were entering a new age of cognitive thought. They were entering a new age of emotional intelligence. And they didn't know how to navigate this. So someone had to sort of come down and, play Polly and be the teacher's pet and say, hey, maybe don't murder that guy, maybe don't rape that woman, and maybe don't steal what isn't yours and earn this and all of that. And it makes me laugh because it's like what I'm educating people, what I'm telling them, and what we should be doing isn't some sacred secret answer that's been locked away. It's been in a book for the last 2,000 fucking years, and it's all there, which is why I don't understand why people don't get it sometimes, and the narrative materialism and the stoicism and all of this, America is a company really, and capitalistic society is just a company just to turn out money, has dogmatized all of it to a point it's made you go, hey, you need this and not that. And this is why we have a generational divide of people trying to fill a materialistic answer into a spiritual need, which is the problem that we're getting. But if you look at that, that's why we had it. But the problem was though, okay, you could argue the concreteness of its origin, you can't deny the fact that the Bible is written down with logical thought, and it's, in a lot of ways, the 10 Commandments are to minimize the escalation of suffering, okay? Especially the suffering you're inflicting on another, which ends up coming back on you anyway. Because if you have a society that's all, stabbing each other up and raping each other and stealing from each other, everybody's going to enter a spout of depression because the environment's so miserable. So it's really what the Bible and the commandments and everything else within the Bible and its laws were trying to do was minimize the level of suffering to bring up the level of pleasurability. But it had to be done logically and it had to make sense. And okay, I think there are parts of the Bible you can't apply today, which we'll talk about in another episode in Neuro Notes. But if you look at that and when you brought people collaboratively together in Christianity, following those rules, right, in an almost hedonistic way for their own self-spiritual satisfaction and pleasure in the moment, right, maximizing that community spirit and soul that's talked about in the Holy Spirit, there's so much warmth and welcoming because it's deriving on that narrative. And it's not a selfish narrative, it's a collaborative narrative, right? It's a collaborative narrative because you're recruiting other people into an hedonism and an ideology that is very much creating a dogma that's running on positivity to escalate everybody and follow these rules. And yeah, okay, you could argue that, well, part of it is to follow a set of rules on the idea that you're going to enter the promised land. And, it's a debt you're going to pay now and that's going to pay off for eternity later on, or possibly reincarnation. And that in some ways does diminish the validity of it, but it doesn't break the fact that the core fundamentals of Christianity was to bring peace and to follow the 10 Commandments, which is to build harmony and reduce the level of suffering. Now, the problem you got is a lot of what's going on social media is you're building constructs and societies that's running off illogical debate and just what creates traction. Because this is the problem you get. You have what I find is a lot of yes man syndrome on the internet, which basically means, especially in things like video games, if you look online and you look at video games, you have a problem where an influencer can say something, and just because they're an influencer and they have enough people behind them, it has to be correct, even if they're completely and utterly wrong, which is the problem that we're entering, that a lot of what we are agreeing as factual or heavy basis information is not drawn from a logical conclusion, but from the friction it has generated on the internet, which is why it's so difficult, right? And why I worry about it. And you can see this everywhere, right? Okay, from everything from games like Dead by Daylight to Call of Duty. I mean, Dead by Daylight's a huge bloody good case study for that. And it comes down to the idea of, okay, well, where do we draw the line before we realize that the people that we're almost worshipping and that we're following are just human running on opinions and bias, rather than fact that we're going to start pouring down everybody's throats? And this is part of the community vibe that you build. That when you put people together doing this, it becomes a very they versus them, you know, war sort of going on. It's almost creating more a division than it is a collaborative effort, because it almost feels like I'm pushing my influence ideology down your throat to recruit you into my tribe, and if you don't, then you're a fucking idiot, right? That's pretty much what it feels like. And I can say that to you because it's over the internet and there's no fear of you being in my personal space, and you can't tell me wrong because the God has spoken and opened his mouth, so apparently it has to be right, even if there's no source to say different. And that's part of the issue you get with groups. And you can see it all the time. Like, I used to see it at the festivals when I used to go play at the festivals. It's what used to really wind me up. I'd be there on stage watching in the clubs at the festivals and everything else, DJing. Everybody's just off their tits on drugs. And then they're off their tits on alcohol. And part of the problem you got is, well, because everybody else is doing it, I have to do it. And this is part of the problem you also get with who you become in the wrong environment around the wrong group. A lot of people go back to saying, oh, it's peer pressure and stuff like this. I think it's deeper than peer pressure. I think peer pressure is a very surface level term, and it almost teenage downplays the brevity of what it was to wanting to belong. Because that's the real issue you're having, really, isn't it? It's not the peer pressure, it's the wanting to belong, the wanting to be part of that energy. And the problem you got is we as spiritual beings within our energy field and what we feel, when we're in a large environment of people, if they're all vibrating negative, because it's such an overwhelming feeling, we want to, part of us is having our energy drawn into that subconsciously, if we like it or not, and be malabated into negativity. And part of it is because it feels so strong and against us, we want to be part of it. We have to be part of it. You know, it's part of what it is. And that in itself creates a huge jeopardy. So you have to be very, very careful when you're in a group of people in how it is you choose to socialize and accommodate with them. Because you can end up down a very dark path very quickly you didn't want to go down, all for the sake of wanting to feel belongingness. So how do we come about this? Well, part of the way you come about this is you have to start applying more logic into your way of thinking. You know, it's all good being spiritual about it. It's all good being away of the fairies with it and, you know, fuck it, we'll just go and do what we need to do about it. But that's not going to save you. End of the day, you have to come back down to truth and reason. And when people say things and they're citing things, you need to look at, well, where is this coming from? Are they saying this because they need traction, views, and money? Or are they saying this because they legitimately want to help and create a regime that is good, that is looking at removing evil or removing suffering? And most of the internet isn't that. I can tell you now, without a shadow of a doubt, 95% of the internet does not care about reducing suffering. It does not care about anything but fucking profit. That's what it cares about. It is a sociopathic, narcissistic machine that suits them type of people to a fucking T, right? It is vain. It is short-term gratification. It is short-term using people. It is short-term income for a long-term gain. It is everything under the sun that we shouldn't be driving as a human race to create. And yet it's there. And that now is the collaborative environment we're all in, right? Not just the festivals that this speaks of. Okay, you can ignore part of that. What you need to worry about is more the passive thing that's on your doorstep, which is social media and the collaborative environments and groups you're joining in that. And you have to be very, very careful, because it's scary that you can be in a group and you can presume you have something that their voice is going to agree with, and you can put down just the wrong comment or the wrong thing, and then hellfire rains down upon you, as if you took a shit on their doorstep. And it literally, we have created this tribalism of you either agree with what we all say or get out, or we'll troll the hell out of you and bully you until you're out. And that's so, so dangerous, because that's what causes a lot of anxiety, especially on the internet. It creates a lot of anxiety, and I'm finding a lot of people are scared to go against the narrative. And you then create a conundrum where, well, if you have a lot of the same people and in the same world, that insane world being the internet, they will appear insane when they speak, which then creates a narrative, well, perhaps we are insane, perhaps we are out of date, perhaps we are got things wrong. Well, Nazis kind of thought the same, they kind of thought we are right, and we damn well knew they were wrong. So it's happened before. So we're not talking fantasy mystical land here. This is the internet and the power that it has. And it really can create a conundrum of people falsely believing illogical stuff and thinking it's correct or right, even though it shouldn't be. I mean, look at LGBTQ. You can't have 1,000 genders. It doesn't exist. Can't have 1,000 genders. But you'll find there was a set of people that spoke the loudest, had a huge voice, got traction on social media. Yeah, this is the attention and the traction I want with my little narcissistic sociopathic brain. Let's go down this narrative. And then companies went, oh, we can make money with this. Let's make money with it, And that's how it started. I'm convinced that's how it started. But that doesn't mean the narrative is right. And even though it's illogical, you can't just force everybody with their right of freedom of speech, outside of that as it is, to conform to it. And then you create the tribalism. Then everybody gets into this. Spirituality is coming the same. It becomes fashionable to be these weird sects. And it's like, if you don't fit into one of these sects that look at spiritualism as one of these sort of polygames or fashionable statements, of, I'm going to dress like this and hug trees and do this, and I believe in this and I believe on that, and I've got messages from this, and they sound like these stupid SOS messages, and blah, 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 blah. That's because, again, you're getting the same thing. You've got people who are illogical that are creating a following aloud, and then people just following because it creates traction, and they want the attention and the traction from it, even if it's wrong and illogical and doesn't make sense. So you have to apply the voice of reason. You have to apply the voice of reason.